There are many people that think that there are only two types of games developed these days, either indie titles developed by a handful of people and funded on Kickstarter, or AAA productions that are made by teams of thousands of developers and have budgets surpassing the hundreds of millions of euros. And while I understand why many have that impression, given the hype massive games are given and the love indie games receive, there are many games that fall somewhere in the middle, AA productions. These are games that may not have a massive budget, but may still have an important publisher behind them and a medium-sized development team working hard to deliver a pleasant experience. You might think these games have very little to offer, being neither extremely creative indies or resource-intense AAA games, but in reality AA games do play a key role in the gaming world, and many of my favorite video games are medium-sized productions. But first things first, roll the intro. From when I did my Wii U video back in September, I've been playing many games I did not have the pleasure to play years ago. Amongst many, Captain Toad Treasure Tracker is one of them. The title is heavily inspired by the Captain Toad minigame present in Super Mario 3D World, a puzzle minigame that revolved around a Toad exploring small levels. The scope of these levels was to collect stars without jumping due to Toad's heavy backpack, a fun side game that I'm glad that got expanded into a full-on title. The game is neither an indie project nor a massive production, since the active developers behind the game are somewhere between 50 and 100. The content of the game is rich, but not exorbitant. It will last you about 12 hours, and there are some repeated levels. At first, you would think that a game like this would hardly be in the spotlight. Sure, it's a fun title, but it definitely did not change the Wii U's fate, let alone the gaming industry. Despite that, however, I adore Treasure Tracker, and I would consider it to be one of the best games I've played this year. And Captain Toad is far from being the sole AA game I love. Titles like Euro Truck Simulator 2 and The Talos Principle are among my favorite video games of all times, and those would also be considered within that mid-range, developed by teams big enough for people, but not surpassing the 200-300 mark. But why do I consider these titles so important for the gaming industry? The reasons are many, but in this video I want to highlight mainly two: focus on the content and sustainability, two key factors needed for a healthy gaming world. The AA gaming industry is, in my opinion, the sole one that can deliver a solid experience without going over budget, being delayed, and over-promising to the players. As discussed in my previous video Minimalist Games, when it comes to designing an engaging title, it is very important for developers not to make a game complex for complexion's sake. Some titles do require complexity, such as your average Paradox Interactive Grand Strategy, but most games definitely do not need the abundance of content they promise and usually don't deliver. AAA productions in recent years have invested too much into making longer and longer games, titles that in theory could last players hundreds of hours, but that in practice are diluted with repetitive and dull content, such as empty open worlds or uninspired side quests. This causes loss in focus of the scope of a game, and no wonder why player fatigue is so high these days. A AA game is in general more focused on what the game promises. Colo Suarez Gunslinger is an excellent example to explain this point. The first-person shooter has a campaign that is neither too long nor too short, where the gameplay works sublimely, and the levels are designed in such a way that the player can explore them without getting too distracted. In a AAA shooter like Far Cry 6, starting a mission feels like a bureaucratic process. Besides, there are so many ways you can free an outpost before it becomes repetitive. The shooting itself is not bad, but the quantity of variables and the amount of repetition makes the game less focused. And this is not just a Ubisoft thing. The problem is that since AAA games are sold to 70 or even 80 euros nowadays, developers are forced to dilute the experience as much as possible in order to claim a game's content lasts longer, to be quote-unquote worth the price, a problem reasonable priced AA games simply don't have. Indie games can have the opposite shortcoming. Since the resources are limited, developers focus too much in making the sole outstanding mechanic work, giving less focus to the rest of the title. I adore the small indie game Spirit of the North, but I can't help to think that while the visuals are awesome, longevity and gameplay are a bit sacrificed in order to stay within budget. AA productions have the space to polish out all aspects of the game without sacrificing their main selling point, or diluting it too much to force sales of microtransactions or additional DLCs. That's why I love the previously cited Captain Toad Treasure Tracker. The game has a solid gameplay, nice graphics, and a simple yet effective narrative. Adding too much to the game could have made the experience repetitive and uninspired. Too little, and the game would have been too bare-bone for my liking. And don't you think that a AA game does not dare to try something new? Spec Ops: The Line is a third-person shooter that has a heavy focus on the plot, reimagining the novel Hearts of Darkness in a modern setting, truly catching the player off guard with its various plot twists. The game might not be a massive open-world adventure, but believe me, it is a title hard to forget. Speaking of size, the second strong point AA games have on their side is their sustainability. As you might be aware by now, in the past 4 years of the new gen, we have seen far and few in between games, since development costs and budgets have skyrocketed over unsustainable levels. I would need a whole video to discuss the smaller recession we are seeing in the gaming world, but two out of the many issues that developers are facing are the ever-increasing costs and the player fatigue. People are tired of playing games like they're clocking in at work, to play games like it's a second job rather than an exciting but not endless journey. To the people out there that are suffering from this burnout, like partially myself, I heavily suggest playing AA games, since they propose a much more sustainable gaming model. Games like Yoshi Woolly World are not only cheaper but last the right amount of time, long enough for having a gratifying adventure but not too short that you're left with nothing after 2 days. AAA games like Avalanche Studios' Rage 2 were developed by 200 people, yet the mold of content it promises is perhaps its biggest weak spot. Indie titles like Platonis Yooka-Laylee suffer from the opposite problem. The developers tried to emulate what a solid AA production can do, but without having the budget for it, they had to leave aspects of the game bland and uninspired. A huge shame since Yooka-Laylee is an overall redeemable experience. This is not to say that AA games are by default better than indie or AAA productions. If anything, their major drawback is that they might fall into that uncanny valley where there is neither the charm of an indie passion project nor the budget for a bestseller. But when done right, a AA game could offer both in a concise and well-worth bundle. Not all games need to have a heavy budget in order to function well. With Horror's remake of Advance Wars, Waplans 2 Reboot Camp is fantastic just the way it is. The game got a nice new coat of paint when it comes to its art style, and some things were definitely polished in the gameplay too. The around 50 developers that worked behind the scenes were more than enough to deliver a solid experience. Point being that to have a more sustainable gaming industry, we do not need more massive titles that may result in massive flops like Concord, but more focused projects that put the right size of content within a game. Not too much, not too little. This is easier to do in a mid-sized production, or in other words, AA games. It goes without saying that of course some titles work well because they are either indies or AAAs. For example, an indie game like Inside works well because it's minimalistic both in its gameplay as well as its art direction, something achievable only with a smaller workforce. A big production like Zelda Tears of the Kingdom on the other hand can only be achieved with the massive resources Nintendo put behind it. Smaller teams that have tried to emulate the same results by cutting corners did not nearly have the same success. But the premise of this video was not to convince you that AA games are perfect and superior to the rest, but rather to share the importance they have in the gaming world, despite being an odd mix of the two extremes. I strongly believe that many AA productions can focus on pursuing creative ideas far from the mainstream without having to resort to crowdfundings. Captain Toad is definitely not 2014's Game of the Year, not even by a long shot, but it is an extremely solid title that I would recommend to everyone, and it is far from the sole AA game you should give a chance to this year. Many think that AA games are in an awkward position, neither too small to be considered passion projects, but not too big to see global success. Despite that, there are many games that I enjoy that are made by mid-sized studios that deserve praise and love by us players. There is a comforting feeling playing games that try something new without diluting the experience for increasing sales or being limited by very small budgets. Games like the ones I've cited in the video are fantastic because they are AA titles, and I would not want them to be any other way. If you made it this far, I wanted to thank you one too many AA games times for watching today's video. This was a bit of a short one since there wasn't too much to say about the topic, but I still wanted to share my opinion about games not often discussed on YouTube or in the internet in general. Still, I hope you enjoyed it and I wish you all a wonderful day. And until next time, arrivederci!